Hello and welcome everybody to another photo critique. So today I've got 9 pictures from Bob and I've actually imported all of these pictures into Lightroom so I can show you the adjustments rather than just explain them, and that way it really makes it a lot more comprehensive and also a lot more interesting and informative to watch. I'm always gonna give you a quick rundown of the overall picture and the composition first, and then afterwards go to the editing. But this picture right here, as an overall, I really love it. I think everything works together, especially the haze and the mist in the background. It works so well with these trees in the forest. And also this path, it just leads you into the picture, and it also kinda splits the picture in two in a good way, because that way it makes it less cluttered. And I really love the composition. Also you have a little tree on the left which makes it less empty. I really love everything here. But to the editing, I would definitely bring down the highlights no matter what, and especially if you're looking at the path and there's foliage in the foreground, you're gonna see a huge difference from before to after. It really retrieves a lot of the highlight details that would otherwise be almost blown. Another quick tip: whenever you shoot foliage in a forest, in a scene like that, especially when it's wet, then you will get a lot of reflections on the highlights on all of these leaves. So you can even, you can fix that kind of with the minus highlights, or rather just make it look better, but you can never fully get rid of it. So that's where you want to use a polarizer that will really get rid of the reflection, and you could otherwise not do that. But it's definitely not a big deal here, just a little thing to keep in mind. And once again, definitely minus highlights. Now, to my own style, what I would do to the picture would actually be go a lot into the minus exposure to really give it a very gloomy, a very mysterious kind of overall atmosphere. And then just bring up the whites to give a little bit more dynamic, maybe make it even darker. I would add a lot of contrast as well, maybe just bring up the shadows a little bit so it's not completely lost. And honestly, I think this is a really, it's a different kind of picture, but it might even work better. It's definitely up to you. Of course, this is just very quickly done, so you might want to add some dodge and burning and make everything a little bit more refined afterwards. But as an overall picture from before to after, let's just quickly see. I mean, it seems kind of overexposed on the left, but honestly, I think the right just works better. It just works better with the overall mood, so that's just something you might want to consider. Although, of course, you definitely don't necessarily have to do it. But in any case, bring down the highlights, and that will already make your picture look so much better. And to number 2, so here we got another path. Once again, definitely bring down the highlights. But to the overall picture, I really don't think this works at all. So you have a ton of stuff going on, all of these textures, all of these plants and leaves, but at the same time, there is really nowhere that my eye goes to and stays at. It's really just a mess, and also this path, it doesn't really lead me into the picture, and even if it would, where would it go to? It would just go to some foliage, some mess in the background. And I really don't think this picture is up to anything. I think you couldn't really even edit this in a way where you can make it interesting. Maybe if you would go for a very dark and kind of mysterious look, but even then it's really, it's not gonna be good or anything. So once again, this is a then honest critique, and I'm gonna say it as I think it is. Of course, there are always a ton of different opinions, so never take it as a, as a rule. Just look at it as an additional point of information. But this picture really is not good whatsoever. Then the next one. So you have an interesting subject here. So to the overall picture, I do think the only thing interesting in this particular photo are the people and the clouds. The clouds work really well, they look great, and the people are also sort of interesting. I think if you were making different composition, maybe even, something like that, a vertical panoramic shot, it might even work a little bit better, even though it doesn't really work how it is right here. You would really have to try to find a better foreground and everything like that. Because the foreground as it is right here, it just isn't really interesting. You have this entire piece right here. It's just not pretty whatsoever. It's just a mess of this road and these rocks. And to the valley, I think you definitely have too much blues, so let me just bring down the blues right here. The valley itself is also not really interesting, and the whole picture just seems kind of like a snapshot. It really doesn't work for me, and the overall color, once again, it isn't really up to too much. It just seems kind of faded out, especially in the greens, and I'm not really sure if you could really fix that. So, to the overall picture, I like the concept, especially with the people. I think if you would really zoom in, with a telephoto lens, of course you can't do that in post, otherwise you would lose way too much image quality. But to something like that, with maybe a better foreground element, it could actually work, but how the picture is right here, I don't think that there is anything to it except for the clouds and the people. So you could try black and white, and it might even work better, but at the end, still not that great of a picture. Then here, so a forest pathway. Now, I really love that you shot this in a way where you have the path towards the left and not in that center. And it also makes the path not only lead you into the picture from the bottom to the far distance, but also from the left to the right. So that's a thing that I really love about this photo. Also, I think the trees and everything, the foliage works really well together. It's nothing cluttered. It's really a good subject. Now to the editing, I would once again definitely bring down the highlights. And as for the color, I would go into the hue here and just make the greens a little bit less poisony. So that already works a lot better from before to after, I think. But once again, if I would have to edit this picture for myself, I would actually go for a pretty dark look. Now, this is a JPEG file, so you won't get as good of a quality as you would with your own RAW file. But just as a general idea of the look, I think this works. Just bring down the exposure, bring up the whites a little bit to get some of that dynamic. Maybe even go a little bit into the minus clarity so the textures are not quite as strong. And then, there's really a lot you could do to it. For example, vignetting on the bottom especially, but also on the top right here. And just add dodge and burning with minus exposure on some parts, with plus exposure on other parts. But I don't really want to go too in depth here, just kind of a general idea. So from before to after, I don't know which one you like better. I think the right one works a lot better with the overall saturation, and it just seems a little bit more mysterious once again. But overall, great picture, absolutely love it. Then we've got a hiking path. This is actually interesting. So let me just take another look. Once again, definitely bring down the highlights, especially here on the path, and once again on the foliage. It really makes a huge difference. But to the overall picture, I really think it works really, really well together. So you have the foreground element, this puddle, but the thing that really makes it work is this very rock right here. Not only does it give it an anchor point and a really strong foreground connecting piece, but it also kind of leads me into the path, into this hiking path right here, which then leads into the rest of the picture. And everything is framed in a way where it goes to the background, even from the right, with this line going into the background, and even with this branch right here going into the line, also going into the background. So I think compositionally it works so well together. It really, you manage to get so much into this picture while not making it cluttered, which is really a difficult task to do. But also with the elements, once again, this branch really works well together. Also this hat gives some additional interest and also continues the line. And to the editing, I really don't think there's any editing needed, except of course for the minus highlights. But if you want to try something, then I might want to try plus shadows here in the tonal curve. just so you get some shadow details in these very dark shadows. And also a little bit minus clarity, minus exposure even, and a bit of plus whites, although it's really, it's not that big of a difference, and it might even work better without all of that. Just in any case, definitely minus highlights, and I think the picture is really, really strong. Then to the next one. I really love this picture. So, especially layer-wise, from the foreground you have this beach going into the water, kind of divided almost by a wave, going to the next wave, going to the rocks, going to the way distant rocks with this mist and with this haze. It really also creates additional atmosphere, but also depth from the foreground to background. Also, I really like the way you've composed all of the rocks. It really works together, nothing is empty, and of course these seagulls give an additional point of interest. You could also try out black and white, of course, although, it gives kind of more attention towards the shades and the shadows, but at the end I would stick in color. It really works well together. Once again here, I might bring down the highlights just a little bit, and even grab an adjustment brush with some minus clarity just for the background to just kind of exaggerate all of that mist and haze even more, so you just get an even more distinctive differentiation from foreground to background. And if you would want to exaggerate the lighting, you could even go a little bit into the oranges here in the split toning, but it's definitely not needed, and I think the picture is great how it is. Then here, once again, definitely bring down the highlights. I mean, look at the whites right here, how much detail you'd recover as I go into the minus highlights. But as an overall picture, I don't think this is really up to too much. So, first of all, the only thing that really captures my eye is this line of this moss, which does look good. It also has a nice shape to it. But after this kind of puddle right here, just everything becomes very boring. It's just kind of gray, then you have some trees, this very dark sky. It just really doesn't work together. I think you would need more with this picture, maybe a foreground element such as a tree or an interesting rock along with this line, and also the background would have to be something more interesting than what it is right here. So I do like the overall idea and the overall concept, but I really don't think it works all that well in this particular scenery. Then to the next photo, I think this really works well together. So you have the horizon on the upper thirds, which really works well here, and you also have all of these cliffs from the top right to the bottom right. And you've also managed to get just enough of these cliffs and enough of this beach to where it adds as an additional foreground element, but at the same time doesn't take away too much attention of the picture. So I really like that. I also love the texture in the waves, it really works well. Also the rocks on the bottom left and on the top left, it really works as an additional element, so it is not as empty there. So I absolutely love the overall picture. However, I would definitely bring down the highlights, maybe in exchange bring up the whites a little bit. But other than that, maybe you want to try to go for kind of a more neutral look, something like that. But of course that's completely up to you. You might want to grab an adjustment brush with some minus exposure just to add some vignetting, but other than that, actually I would go to the hue in the HSL and just make the blues a little bit darker and maybe even more saturated. But other than that, great picture. At the end, your editing style, whether you want to go for a look like this or a very warm look, completely up to you, and I think both work really great. And the last picture is kind of this hole, I guess. Once again, bring down the highlights. It really has a huge difference from before to after. But the whole picture, I'm not sure if it is really up to too much, because it's really just the hole, the texture, and of course the blues, which work really well. But other than that, it's just kind of missing some additional element. I don't think the picture is bad, but you might want to go towards the bottom left and kind of use this whole structure as a leading line into the rest of the picture and then continue it with another element. But how it is right now, it's almost, it's not that interesting, but at the end, still pretty colors, so I'm not gonna say anything bad about this photo. So these were the 9 pictures from Bob. Thank you very much for submitting them. I really think you have a lot of great pictures. Just go into the minus highlights with them. And generally speaking, you might just be a little bit too bright. But definitely the minus highlights is the biggest part, and also you might want to consider using a polarizer in the future, especially for scenes like that, because then you wouldn't even get the reflections on all of these ferns and all of the vegetation. But at the end, I think, this picture is really great, this picture is terrible. I like the concept on this one, but it doesn't really work at the end. Then this great picture, great picture, great picture. Once again, like the concept, but it doesn't really work how it is. Great picture. And here, while not being bad, it is not really that interesting. So I hope you found some of these tips and techniques helpful. Once again, it's just my personal opinion. Just look at it as an additional point of view rather than just something you should do, because of course you are the photographer and at the end you have to know what looks best and works best in your opinion. So thank you very much for watching. As always, if you would like to see more videos just like this one, other Lightroom tutorials and other photography videos, then be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I hope to see you all in the next episode. Until then, take care.